Hello and welcome to the Science for Sleepy. Tonight, as you rest your head gently upon your pillow, imagine stepping into a world of quiet curiosity. A place where moonlight slowly illuminates the ocean, painting silvery paths across endless waves. The night air is soft, each breath deepening your peace as we wander together into the embrace of gentle tides. If you're enjoying this quiet journey through curiosity and time, consider subscribing. There's always more to explore gently. We'd love to know your location and time zone in the comments. Now, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a peaceful shoreline. It is night, and the sky above is clear and calm. You feel the sand beneath your feet, soft and cool, shifting slightly with every step. The rhythmic sound of the waves brushing gently against the shore whispers around you, a timeless lullaby created by nature itself. You notice the moon beginning to rise, its pale, silvery face appearing above the horizon, casting an ethereal glow across the vast ocean before you. As the moon climbs higher into the night sky, something curious happens. The water appears to stir beneath its gaze, shifting slowly, almost imperceptibly, as though responding to the moon's presence. It is as if the ocean feels the gentle touch of lunar rays and begins to follow, like a dance performed in quiet harmony. You watch the waves inch closer, the shoreline shrinking gradually, a quiet rhythm unfolding as though the moon itself gently tugs the sea towards it. Yet, this dance is subtle, slow, barely noticeable unless you pause, take a deep breath, and truly observe. The water rises and falls in silent, endless cycles, guided by forces both powerful and gentle. It moves without hurry, almost breathing in harmony with the universe, softly revealing its secrets to those who patiently watch and listen. In the midst of this quiet observation, you begin to wonder about the hidden connections between the moon and the water, how one celestial body, drifting silently through the vast emptiness of space, can have such a profound influence on oceans countless miles below. The waves respond faithfully, with an almost tender obedience, as though an invisible bond links them eternally. The sleepy scientist inside you begins to stir gently, your curiosity piqued by this celestial mystery. How exactly does the moon, distant and serene, influence the gentle rhythmic movements of the sea? What unseen force draws these two distant worlds together, creating tides that ebb and flow like breaths taken in peaceful slumber? Gazing upward, you see the moon's glowing face, serene yet powerful, guiding the ocean in its nightly journey. Beneath your feet, the wet sand begins to glisten softly as the tide moves ever closer, responding faithfully to the moon's quiet command. Each wave seems to whisper softly, hinting at the delicate physics behind this nightly dance. As your eyelids grow heavier, soothed by the rhythmic whispers of waves and bathed in soft lunar glow, you sense a gentle invitation. Tonight, you will drift slowly into dreams illuminated by moonlight, dreams that softly guide you through the science of tides, as peaceful and eternal as the ocean's embrace. We begin our exploration simply by noticing, by breathing in time with the waves, by gently contemplating the moon's silent power over the oceans, and perhaps by recognizing that we too are part of this subtle dance, drawn slowly but inexorably by invisible threads into a deeper understanding of our interconnected world. Let this thought carry you gently into sleep, as we prepare to journey deeper into the gentle science behind tides. Tonight is only the beginning, the first soft whispers of a moonlit story told patiently, kindly, and quietly. For now, simply breathe, Breathe as the ocean breathes beneath the moon's watchful, tender gaze. Feel your own rhythms aligning with these gentle waves as sleep draws closer, gently pulling you into peaceful dreams of silver moonlight and softly shifting seas. The earth does not stand still. It turns slowly, endlessly, beneath stars that seem fixed in place but are always drifting. You may not feel it, but in this quiet moment, as you lie back and drift, the ground beneath you is spinning, a slow pirouette that carries entire oceans with it. This rotation is constant, quiet, and immense, and yet the ocean does not slosh randomly. It rises, it falls, predictably, gently, always guided. Something is helping it to keep time. You are floating now, above the turning earth, just high enough to see the planet's great blue shape move beneath you like a living globe. The oceans are wide and deep, their surfaces smooth in some places and restless in others. In the moonlight they gleam like soft silk drawn tight over a sleeping body. But if you look closely you begin to see the rhythm, a slow shift, a gradual lean in the water's surface like a liquid sigh. The tides are not just pulled by the moon, but by the Earth's own motion, its steady rotation pulling the oceans into a dance of balance and momentum. It's easiest to think of the Earth and Moon as a system rather than separate things. They revolve around a shared centre of mass, known as the barycenter, not quite at the Earth's core, but near enough that the Earth itself wobbles slightly as it moves. This wobble, this constant turning and tugging, helps sculpt the tides we know. The water on the side of Earth closest to the moon is pulled gently toward it, creating a bulge, a small but significant rise in sea level. At the same time, on the far side of the Earth, the oceans bulge again, not from pull, but from release, inertia carrying water outward as the solid Earth is pulled slightly away from it. Two bulges, two high tides, and between them, two lower stretches of sea. But this doesn't happen in one place. The Earth turns and the bulges move with it, sliding across oceans, brushing shorelines, filling estuaries, receding again. It is not a wave that travels and crashes, it is a global, breathing motion, as if the planet itself is inhaling and exhaling. Now imagine you're standing once again on a beach, but instead of night time, it is early morning. The sun is just beginning to rise, but the moon still lingers in the sky. You feel the sand damp beneath your toes. The tide has just gone out. You're between movements, between breaths. The ocean has pulled away from the shore, and small pools of water are left behind like gentle footprints. You stand still, listening to the wind, and beneath it you hear a deeper rhythm. Not of crashing surf, but of time itself. These tides, too high, too low every day, are older than any story we can remember. They've been with Earth from the beginning. Long before cities, before people, before animals even walked the land. The first life may have emerged in these tidal shallows, stirred by the moon and warmed by the sun, rocked gently by the breathing of the planet, and so the turning Earth keeps the ocean in motion, not wildly, not violently, but with poise, with consistency, with patience. You drift again, rising higher, seeing the continents slide beneath you. The bulges of the tide are not visible in any single moment. They are too subtle. But over time, if you could watch for days, you would see them slide around the globe, always following the same cycle. Each coastline receiving the ocean's touch in turn, as if the moon were slowly caressing the edges of the earth. There is peace in that rhythm, comfort in its predictability. For all the chaos we imagine in nature, the tides remind us that some things move with quiet grace, unwavering. We are part of a world that sways, not by accident, but by ancient design. A world where the moon's steady pull and the Earth's rotation work in harmony. Let this slow turning lull you. Let the idea that your planet sways in gentle rhythms become part of your own breathing now. Inhale slowly as the ocean swells toward the shore. Exhale gently as it draws away once more. The sleepy scientist within you smiles quietly, already preparing to drift deeper into the mystery, to follow the thread that links moon and sea, and soon to see how that thread is spun from gravity itself. But not just yet. Not while you're so comfortable here, standing between the moonlight and the sea breeze, at the edge of a turning world that moves like a lullaby. There is a thread. It stretches from the moon to the ocean, invisible but unbreakable, a slender cord of force woven through space itself, and though you cannot see it, you can feel its pull in every tide, every rising wave, every gentle fall of water away from the shore. This thread is gravity, not a sudden tug but a continuous quiet invitation. Close your eyes and imagine the moon hanging above you in a velvet sky. It appears so small, so far, and yet it holds the entire ocean in its grasp. What kind of force could do that? What kind of presence must it have to move entire seas without ever touching them? Now, drift into this thought with us. Gravity is often described as a pull, but it's better to think of it as a shape, the way mass curves the space around it. The moon, though modest compared to Earth, bends the fabric of space just enough that Earth's oceans notice. They respond to this bend, this soft dip in the cosmic blanket, by flowing toward it, settling into it, like water finding the deepest point in a bowl. It happens slowly, without sound. There is no crash, no thunder, just a long, patient lean in the direction of the moon. The force of gravity works not as a command, but a suggestion the oceans follow endlessly. Now take a deep breath and picture yourself hovering just above the sea's surface. You can see the curve of the earth beneath you, the sweep of the water stretching outward toward the horizon. The moon is directly above, and in that moment the water begins to swell beneath it, a broad, low rise that follows the moon's path like a shadow made of water. This is not a wave, it is not fast, it is not crashing, it is something slower, deeper, a shift in the whole ocean, spread over hundreds of miles, a change so vast and quiet that you can only notice it with time. This is the moon's thread at work. Now imagine cutting that thread. Imagine the moon disappearing from the sky. The ocean would still move, yes. The wind would stir its surface. The earth would still spin. But the great rhythm of the tides would begin to falter. There would be no more predictable rising, no great swells drawing themselves to shore, no regular breathing of the sea. The planet would lose one of its oldest patterns, one of its most ancient partnerships. You begin to realize that gravity is not just force, it is connection. It is the relationship between two bodies across space. The Earth pulls on the moon, and the moon pulls back. They orbit together, each shaping the other's motion, their balance perfect in its tension. The oceans are simply the most visible proof of this bond. Their rise and fall, gentle and steady, show us that space is not empty. It is filled with these quiet threads, pulling and holding, guiding and shaping the motion of worlds. And this idea, this invisible architecture, does not only belong to oceans, it belongs to everything. Gravity touches you too, even now as you lie, still. Still it holds you to the earth, and it holds the earth in its graceful fall around the sun. Everything rests upon these invisible threads. but the one between the moon and the ocean is special. It is ancient. It has shaped coastlines, carved cliffs, and filled tidal pools for billions of years. It has guided animals through their migrations, signaled to coral when to spawn, whispered to shorebirds when to begin their flight. And still it continues, quiet, steady, without pause. Let yourself feel it now, not as a scientist with numbers and measurements, but as a quiet witness. Imagine each wave as a message, each tide as a response. The moon calls, and the ocean answers again and again. It is a conversation that has never stopped, not for a single night. In the darkness of this quiet world, the moon's gravity is a soft hand, extended across space, gently stroking the skin of the sea. The thread it spins holds everything in place and everything in motion. Tonight, we begin to see that the sea is not just water, it is memory. It remembers the pull, it remembers the shape, and with every tide, it repeats the shape of gravity itself, drawn in liquid form. Let this thought settle around you like mist on the ocean. Gravity is not noise, it is silence, it is patience, it is the universe speaking softly, shaping even the stillest water. Let your breath follow that same shape, in and out, like the tide. Drawn forward, released gently. The sleepy scientist within you smiles again, already drifting toward the next question. If there are two bulges in the sea, one facing the moon, the other facing away, what are they really? And how can two tides rise at once, when the moon can only face one place at a time? The answer waits quietly, just ahead, like a tide not yet turned. Two bulges. You see them now, not in the way we usually imagine waves, but as slow, sweeping hills of water stretched across the curve of the earth. One bulge follows the moon, faithful and close, like a soft shadow clinging to its light. The other trails behind on the far side of the planet, rising not from attraction, but from momentum, an echo, a balance. Together they form the signature of the tide. Two humps of ocean, not crashing but lifting. As the earth spins beneath them, they appear to move, east to west, sweeping across the surface like gliding mirrors of the moon's influence. Wherever you are on the planet, you pass beneath these bulges roughly twice each day, greeted by high tide as the sea comes to meet you, and left again as the water gently retreats. But how can this be? How can one moon create two tides? The sleepy scientist in you leans in quietly. The answer lies not just in gravity, but in inertia, that steady resistance to change, that soft stubbornness of motion. The Earth and the Moon are locked in a shared orbit circling a common center. As they whirl through space, the oceans don't sit still. They respond not just to the Moon's pull, but to the whole geometry of motion. Imagine for a moment that you're standing at the center of a carousel. You're spinning gently, and in each hand you're holding a cup of water. As you twirl, the water in the cups leans outward, away from the center, not because it's being pulled, but because it wants to keep moving straight. That outward lean, that gentle push, is inertia. It's the body's quiet insistence on continuing its path. On Earth, the water on the side facing the moon is pulled toward it. But the water on the far side, it isn't being pulled by the moon at all. Instead, it's being left behind ever so slightly, because the solid earth beneath it is being pulled more strongly. That difference, the imbalance between pull and resistance, creates the second bulge. Two forces, one pulling forward, the other hanging back, and in between them, a turning earth carrying coastlines through this symmetrical swell. It's not an exact mirror, of course. The earth isn't perfectly round and the oceans aren't evenly deep, The continents interrupt, the seafloor interferes, but still the pattern holds. One bulge ahead, one behind. The ocean always responding, always breathing. You may wonder, why don't we see these bulges from space? Why don't they rise like mountains, clearly visible in photographs of the Earth? The answer is simple and humbling. The tidal bulges are only about 1 meter high, spread across thousands of kilometers. So broad, so shallow, so slow. A change almost too gentle to notice without careful watching, but it's there, and it's always moving. Now drift with us beneath the surface. Down, down into the depths, where the tidal forces still reach, even miles below. The movement is slow here, slower than above, but it exists. The water stirs, drawn upward by the shape of the bulge passing overhead. Not a wave, not a storm, just a rise, like the quiet swelling of breath inside a sleeping chest. The marine life knows this rhythm. Even without clocks, without calendars, fish and plankton and giant squid sense the tides. They move with them, they feed with them, they hide in time with their coming and going. The tides set the schedule, and everything else listens. Back on the surface you are floating again. Looking down at a tiny island as the tide comes in, the shoreline shrinks, little pools disappear, the air grows moist with salt, and then, hours later, it reverses. The water pulls back, rocks reappear, crabs scurry, seaweed breathes again. 2 bulges, 1 dance. The moon above, serene. The earth below, turning. And between them, the ocean responding to both gravity and motion, never pausing, never resting. Let yourself sink into that rhythm now. The bulge comes, the bulge goes, you rise, you fall. The water never argues with the moon. It only listens. It only responds. You can too. With each breath, imagine yourself passes beneath the bulge. A moment of fullness. A moment of release. You are a shoreline being visited by the sea again and again, without force, without rush, only rhythm. The sleepy scientist drifts onward. We've felt the shape of the tide, we've traced its twin pulses. But what does it mean for the ocean to breathe, to inhale and exhale under the guidance of the moon? The next part of our journey explores just that. The tide, not as a concept but as a breath. The ocean, not as a force, but as a being, alive with rhythm, moved by light, at peace with motion. Let's follow it further, but not yet. For now, rest. Let the twin tides pass quietly over you, one from the front, one from behind, like a cradle rocking in perfect balance. The ocean breathes, not like lungs, not in gasps or gulps, but in vast, slow movements that span continents and echo across time. The tide is its breath, 2 long, steady inhalations, 2 matching exhalations each day. It does not hurry, it does not stumble. It flows in a rhythm so gentle it feels like a whisper drawn across the edge of the world. You're lying now on a floating dock, half awake, half dreaming. The wood beneath you rises just slightly, then sinks again, barely enough to notice. But it is there, the slow lift, the careful drop. Beneath you, the water moves with purpose, and you, without effort, are carried by its rhythm. The ocean is breathing. High tide is its inhale. The water gathers, drawn upward and inward, pressing gently against the land. Harbours fill. Estuaries stretch wide. Small waves reach farther than before, as if the sea itself leans forward, curious. It is not a lunge. It is a breath. Patient, expansive, complete. And then, exhale. The water withdraws, smooth and obedient, slipping back toward the deep. Beaches lengthen, stones glisten. The sea does not crash away. It recedes with dignity, as if it trusts it will be welcomed again. and it always is, this rhythm is ancient, predictable, measured not in seconds but in long, deliberate hours, 6 hours rising, 6 hours falling, another 6, another. The day is wrapped in these movements, soft as silk. You imagine the Earth's oceans like a single great lung, inhaling twice, exhaling twice, under the calm guidance of the moon. Inhale toward the moon's position, exhale away. It is not just a metaphor. It is motion with meaning. It is gravity translated into breath, and you are part of it. Your body, too, is mostly water, and though you may not feel the tides inside you, they are there, in a way. The moon's gravity touches you just as it touches the sea. It's not strong enough to lift your limbs, but it is steady enough to stir you in dreams. Now let's turn to the land, to the places where people have built their lives by the edge of this breath. Fishing villages, salt marshes, tide mills, whole cultures have grown around the gentle expansion and retreat of the sea. Schedules arranged by when boats can come and go. Rituals aligned with the rising water. Livelihoods shaped by when the ocean speaks and when it is silent. And it is always speaking, just quietly. Sometimes it speaks in moonlight, a high tide at midnight, brushing the walls of a sleeping port town. Other times, it whispers in the morning, laying bare wide flats of sand for birds to feed and shells to shine. People who live by the sea learn to feel the tides without thinking. They don't check clocks, they read seaweed lines, they see the angle of anchored boats. They feel it in the air, that barely there difference in dampness and wind. The tide is not just a measurement, it's a companion. And for the creatures of the ocean, this breath is survival. Tiny creatures time, they're spawning with the highest tide. Crabs scuttle upshore just before the water rises, knowing they have only minutes to lay their eggs. Fish move inland through river mouths during spring tides, taking advantage of the extra reach. And when the sea exhales, birds swoop in, feeding on the life left behind in shallow pools. You see it now. The breath of the sea is not just a pattern, it is a clock, a signal, a song sung in rhythm by every living thing that touches salt water. Let yourself breathe with it. Let each inhale be the tide rising, quiet but full. Let each exhale be the tide pulling back, soft and sure. There is no rush, no sharpness, just presence. The sleepy scientist inside you is comforted by this, that something so vast, so powerful can also be gentle, that the moon can control the ocean not with force, but with rhythm, that the sea itself can teach us how to breathe, slowly, deeply, in harmony with something greater than ourselves. This is the science of quiet things, and as we drift further into the tides, we begin to notice other forces joining the breath. The moon is not alone in shaping the tide's rhythm. Another light enters the sky, bold and steady, the sun. What happens when two lights pull on the sea at once? The next breath will show us. But for now, let your thoughts dissolve like footprints in the sand at high tide. Let the rising water cover you in calm. Let the exhale leave you light and still. Breathe with the ocean. Sleep beside its rhythm. There are two lights in the sky. One is soft and silver, drifting quietly across the night. The moon, familiar and calm. The other is bold, radiant, filling the day with heat and clarity. The sun, vast and burning, far more powerful than it appears through sleepy eyes. Together they move the sea not with competition, but in a quiet, layered harmony. You're floating now between night and day, eyes half closed, feeling the weight of their pull. The moon tugs at one side of the ocean. The sun, even more distant, pulls at another, and the water listens to both, stretched in two directions, deciding which voice to follow. This is not a battle. It is a blending of forces, a quiet interference pattern made from gravity and light. Sometimes the moon and the sun align. They stand together, one behind the other, pulling the sea in the same direction. Their combined strength creates the highest of high tides and the lowest of lows. These are the spring tides, not named for the season, but for the way the water springs forward and back with more energy, more reach. These moments happen during the new moon and the full moon. Twice each month the sea responds with a little more drama, not chaos, just emphasis, a higher breath, a deeper exhale. Now imagine standing on a wooden pier during a spring tide. The water is fuller, closer than usual. Boats rise just a little higher. Seaweed clings higher on the pilings. The air carries more salt, and you, still and thoughtful, can feel it. The extra stretch, the stronger tug. But then, there are other days. Days when the moon and the sun are at right angles, their gravitational pulls pulling in different directions. These are the neap tides. The breath of the ocean grows smaller, more restrained. The high tide isn't so high. The low tide doesn't fall as far. Everything softens. It's as if the sea is resting. Not every breath must be deep. Sometimes it's enough to inhale gently and exhale with less urgency. The neap tide is not a failure of motion. It's a moment of balance, a lull between stronger surges. It reminds us that rhythm has variation, that not every part of the pattern is grand. Some parts whisper. You float above it all now, watching the earth turn. Two lights, moon and sun, orbiting with us. Each day, the angle between them shifts slightly, and the ocean responds, not blindly, not mechanically, but with a kind of grace. In this layered rhythm, every drop of water listens. It listens to both lights, and it finds a path between them. This is the nature of tidal modulation, the quiet merging of two gravitational pulses, the push and the pull, the rise and the hush. It's not unlike the way two people might walk side by side, sometimes matching pace, sometimes drifting apart but always aware of the other's presence. We too are influenced by the moon and the sun. We feel their presence in ways we don't always name, in our sleep patterns, in our moods, in our quietest instincts. They pull at our water too, not enough to lift us, but perhaps enough to move our dreams. Imagine now a tide chart, not a mechanical graph, but a painting, alive with slow waves. You see the peaks of spring tides, like mountain crests, then the low humps of neap tides, smooth and understated, back and forth, again and again. This chart isn't numbers, it's music, a score written in gravity and time. Fishermen follow it, so do sea turtles. Coral reefs spawn by it. Even ancient people, long before the science, watched these patterns in the sky and in the surf. They knew the tides by moonlight and sunrise, long before they knew the words for gravity or orbit. We've always listened, so now you listen too. You're lying by a calm bay. The water laps quietly nearby. Tonight is a neap tide. The sea does not reach quite as far. The waves pause lower on the rocks. The breathing is smaller, softer. It matches your own. You're not separate from this. You're part of it. Your body, your breath, your heartbeat. All these rhythms fall gently in step with the ocean's pulse. You're not just watching the tide, you're within it, aligned with the moon, steady with the sun. The sleepy scientist within you feels the beauty of this layered balance, the push and pull, the blend of two forces into one long, patient breath. And you wonder, how long has this been happening? How many shorelines have risen and fallen under these same lights, How many memories are held in the edges of tide-carved cliffs and moonlit bays? The water has a memory, and the coastline is its diary. Let's visit it next, a shoreline that remembers every breath of the tide, every pull of the moon, every soft alignment of gravity and time. But not yet. For now, just lie still. Let the dual light of the moon and sun wash over you. Let the tide within you be spring, or neap, or something in between. The shoreline remembers. Each grain of sand, each smooth stone, each worn curve of cliff, all shaped by the slow hands of the tide. You walk there now, barefoot on a beach where water has written its story for centuries. The marks are subtle, a line of darkened shells, a drift of dried seaweed, a ridge where the high tide reached just hours ago. The ocean has no pen, but it leaves its signature every time it breathes. In this quiet place between land and sea, nothing is permanent, yet nothing is forgotten. The shoreline shifts with the tide, always changing, always returning. Imagine yourself here not just once, but every day for a year. You'd begin to see the cycle. The sea comes in a little farther during a full moon, pulls back more gently during a neap. You'd see how storms etch deeper scars, how calm weather builds soft shelves of sand. You'd begin to read the beach the way others read books, each ripple a sentence, each tide pool a pause. Ancient people did this without instruments. They watched the moon, they watched the sea, they marked stones, they tied knots in cords. In some places they carved notches into rock to measure where the high tide reached. Primitive tide gauges still standing. The sleepy scientist inside you walks now among standing stones. Tide markers, shadow clocks, pillars placed so that when the tide touches a certain spot, a certain story is told. Perhaps it's time to plant, or time to fish, or a signal to prepare for the moon's next whisper. And in other places, people built harbours that relied on tidal timing. If the tide was out, ships would rest on mud, their keels tilted like sleeping beasts. If the tide was high, the harbour came alive, bustling, floating, drifting with purpose. All movement dictated by the sea's breath. You begin to see the shoreline not as a boundary, but as a memory, a long strip of earth that remembers every arrival and every retreat. Even the rocks are shaped by this memory, the cliffs, worn over centuries by salt and tide, the sea arches, carved slowly by waves arriving with the same rhythm again and again. You kneel beside a tide pool now, clear and shallow, left behind by the last high tide. Inside, small lives stir. A crab hides beneath a pebble. Seaweed sways gently. A fish darts and disappears. These little pools are the ocean's diary pages, each one a self-contained memory of the last breath of the sea. They will vanish with the next tide, but for now they hold still, offering quiet evidence of motion past. Even the scent of the shoreline changes with the tide. At high tide it is fresh and briny, filled with the energy of movement. At low tide the smell deepens, seaweed, salt, shell, a quiet mustiness like a room opened after sleep. Each phase carries a different memory, a different tone. You feel it now, this place between the moon's pull and the earth's reply. The shoreline is not still. It shifts with the moon. It leans with the gravity. It remembers and reshapes. Think of all the things the tide has touched, all the things it has taken, all the things it has returned, messages in bottles, forgotten shoes, a child's toy, shells from distant coasts. Sometimes even memories return, the smell of a childhood beach, the feel of a certain sand, the sound of a specific tide in a dream. The shoreline is where time blurs, where past and present overlap, tide by tide, and it is never finished. The moon continues to pull, the water continues to rise, the shoreline continues to change, and we continue to walk it, noticing what's different and what has remained. Now imagine the future shoreline, centuries from now. The tide will still come in, the tide will still go out, new stories will be written in sand, new hands will read the clues, the ocean will still breathe, and the moon will still hold its hand just above the water, never touching, always guiding. The sleepy scientist within you stands still now, on that beach of the future, where the tide speaks softly in a language older than words. You do not need to understand every detail. You only need to listen. Let the shoreline hold your memories just for tonight. Let the sand beneath you feel the echo of 1,000 high tides. Let your breath follow that slow pattern. In, like a wave arriving. Out, like a wave returning. The tide remembers. So do you. In the next part of our journey, we'll follow the path of the tidal bulge as it moves across the planet, not just by land, but through ocean trenches, narrow straits, and wide basins. A bulge in motion, a travelling wave of memory. But not yet. Now is a time to pause, to feel the last brush of water on your toes as the tide begins to slip back, to lie on soft sand and dream of a moonlit sea, whispering the past with every breath. It moves. The tidal bulge, that slow, smooth swell of water, is never still. It travels, not like a storm wave crashing across the sea, but like a soft, deliberate ripple drawn across the earth by invisible hands. You can't see it from space. You can't feel it in a single moment, but it's always moving, quietly circling the globe, one gentle rise at a time. Now imagine yourself floating far above the earth, suspended in silence. Below, you watch the ocean curve slightly, a subtle lifting of the surface, not sharp, not sudden. It drifts westward, carried by the turning planet. This is the tidal bulge in motion, following the moon, lagging slightly, always reshaping itself to match the moon's position in the sky. But it's not a perfect chase. The ocean resists, not out of rebellion, but inertia. Friction from the seafloor, the curves of continents, the depth of basins, all of it slows the water's response. So the bulge lags a little behind the moon. It tries to follow, always slightly late, like a sleepy child trailing behind a parent on a quiet walk. This delay is important. It changes everything. It's what keeps the moon drifting farther from Earth over time. It's what transfers energy from our planet's spin into the moon's orbit. But for now, simply notice the shape. We follow it. The bulge drifts through the Great Pacific, a massive basin with miles of depth. The swell is wide here, slow and open. It seems to breathe more freely across this space. But then it meets the edge of a continent, and the rhythm changes. The swell pushes against the land, and water must find a new path. Some of it turns into bays and inlets. Some is funneled into straits. The shape of the coastline begins to matter. The geography decides how high the tide will rise and how far it will stretch. We drift into a narrowing bay now, a long, shallow scoop of land reaching inward. The bulge enters slowly, but as the space tightens, the water piles up. The height grows. The tide becomes stronger here, faster. The breath becomes sharper, like inhaling through a narrow straw. Still gentle, but focused. The shape of the land transforms the tide. Even the seafloor plays a role. A sloping seabed lifts the tide higher. A steep drop leaves the water more relaxed. Every wrinkle of the earth beneath the ocean influences the pace and volume of the tide's journey. Now picture the bulge entering a broad, flat estuary. The ocean breathes in. River water meets salt water. The tide slides inland, turning brackish, slowing slightly as it climbs the land's gentle slope. It brings with it nutrients, silt, small creatures. It is not just movement, it is delivery. The bulge is a courier of life, sweeping inland twice each day with soft arms outstretched. And then, reversal. The bulge moves past, the water falls back, the tide retreats, slow and sure, and in its wake it leaves tide pools, salt lines, and silence. The cycle is never broken, only continued. You begin to see the bulge not as a single wave but as a travelling breath, responding not only to the moon but also to the shape of the world. It adapts, it learns, it moulds itself to the edges of continents, to the wrinkles of the seabed, to the contours of bays. In narrow places it whispers louder, in deep places it stretches thin, but always it moves, always it breathes. Now you float down softly until you're standing on a stilted pier above a long inlet. The tide is coming in. The water slides beneath you, tugging softly at the posts. You feel the motion, not in waves, but in the rising stillness. A lift so slow you could miss it if you blinked. This is the tidal bulge reaching you, not with noise, not with drama, but with inevitability. It came from thousands of miles away. It crossed deep ocean trenches. It curved around islands. It leaned gently into the land. And now it is here, beneath your feet, continuing onward. The sleepy scientist inside you marvels at this, how something as delicate as a single swell can stretch across the whole globe, how the moon, so small in the sky, can send this ripple through every corner of every ocean, again and again. It reminds you that motion is not always fast, that power is not always loud, that change, when shaped by rhythm and time, can travel vast distances and still feel like a whisper when it arrives. And so the bulge moves on, around the earth, always reshaping, always returning. In the next part of our journey, we will visit the places where this movement grows loud, where narrow channels and geographic quirks make the tide surge and thunder, rising like a living wall. But not yet. Tonight, the tide is soft. Tonight, the bulge is quiet. And you, like the sea, are simply moving forward, one gentle breath at a time. Sometimes the tide roars, not everywhere, not always. But in certain corners of the earth, in narrow bays, steep channels and hidden inlets, the quiet breath of the ocean becomes something louder, something more forceful. The slow, travelling bulge accelerates, surges, climbs into itself. The sea rises not just with grace, but with presence, with weight, with voice. You are there now, standing at the edge of the Bay of Fundy. The air is still, the water is low. You see muddy flats stretched wide like a sleepen plain. Wooden posts from old docks reach upward, exposed, leaning quietly into the sky. Boats sit tilted on their sides, waiting. You wait too. And then, slowly, the tide begins to rise. What comes next is not a wave, but a transformation. The sea returns, climbing rapidly. Minute by minute, the flats disappear. The boats begin to lift. The posts, once bare, are slowly submerged. In just 6 hours, the water will rise over 50 feet. The entire shape of the coastline will change. This is one of the highest tides in the world, and it happens because of resonance, a secret harmony between the rhythm of the tide and the shape of the bay. The Bay of Fundy is long, narrow and shallow, shaped almost like a tuning fork. As the tidal bulge enters from the Atlantic, it's funneled into this shape, compressed and amplified. Like pushing water into a bottleneck, the volume increases as space decreases, and the bay itself vibrates in sync with the tidal period, so each returning tide builds upon the last, stacking motion on motion until the sea rises like breath held too long, finally exhaled. The same phenomenon occurs in Mont Saint-Michel on the coast of Normandy. There the tide rushes across the sands with such speed it was once said to gallop like a horse. Pilgrims walking the flats must mind their timing, or risk being overtaken by the swift return of the sea. You imagine now the tide as a vast body stretching its limbs in narrow spaces. In the open ocean it is gentle, nearly flat, but when squeezed, when echoed, it becomes tall, swift, insistent. Not dangerous, not to those who listen, but powerful. You hear it now. The sound of the incoming tide in these places is not a crash, but a rush, a continuous hush like wind through trees, but lower, thicker. It fills the ears slowly, a reminder that water has weight, and that gravity given shape can create a crescendo. The sleepy scientist within you listens carefully. What makes one coastline roar while another remains still? The answer lies in the meeting of shape and timing. In physics, this is constructive interference, two motions aligning to amplify each other. The sea and the bay move in rhythm. The result is not chaos, it's music, but it's not always steady. Some locations experience what's called a tidal bore, a visible wave that travels upriver against the natural current, formed when the incoming tide meets narrowing, shallow channels. The water piles into a wavefront, sometimes a foot high, sometimes several. It rolls upstream like a low, muddy wall, pushing fish, foam, and even small boats before it. You're standing now beside one of these rivers, perhaps the Qiantang in China or the Severn in England. The bore arrives without warning, a soft wall of water curling over the flat plain, reshaping the river in a single breath. Spectators stand at safe distances, watching the tide become a traveller, pushing against the ordinary flow of time. But even here, in this louder rhythm, the pattern remains. It is still the moon, still gravity, still the ocean remembering its path. Only now the song has grown louder. Let yourself imagine the earth's coastlines as a great choir, some voices low, some high, some soft, some strong. Each voice shaped by its geography, each singing the same song in a different key. The moon is the conductor, lifting its baton once every 24 hours and 50 minutes, and the oceans rise in answer. You return now to a quieter place, letting the louder tides pass behind you like echoes. The roaring has faded, the surge has slowed, the breath has deepened again. The tide is not always dramatic. Most of the time it prefers gentleness. But when the shape is right, when the rhythm is perfect, it speaks louder, not to frighten, but to remind. That water has power, that time can build strength, that the moon, when echoed just right, can make the whole planet rise, and then fall, and then rise again. In the next part of our journey, we will visit the opposite places, those hidden corners of the world where the tide barely speaks, where the sea holds its breath instead of exhaling. But not yet. Let the roaring fade now. Let the silence return. And as the tide recedes once more, let your breath follow it, long, low, and steady. There are places where the tide holds its breath, where the ocean barely stirs, where the difference between high and low tide is so small, so subtle, it feels like stillness. No rushing surge, no flooding flats, just a quiet presence, the sea waiting, the moon pulling, and only the faintest reply. You're drifting now above one of these quiet shores, Perhaps it's in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean or along the equator's wide belt. The water is calm, almost glassy, and the coastline rests in a kind of suspended time. The tide is here, it always is, but its movements are muted, measured in inches, not feet, whispered, not sung. You land softly on a pale stone dock, warm beneath your feet. The sea stretches before you, blue and bright, and if you hadn't been told you might not know it was moving at all. But it is, slowly, carefully, just not very far. Why? The sleepy scientist in you sits cross-legged at the water's edge and listens to the answer hidden in geography. The Mediterranean, for example, is nearly enclosed, a sea surrounded by land, with only a narrow opening to the Atlantic, the Strait of Gibraltar. That small connection limits how much tidal bulge can enter and exit. The water inside doesn't have room to build the dramatic rises and falls seen elsewhere. The tide, constrained, becomes delicate. In other places, like certain equatorial zones, the gravitational forces of the moon and sun are still present, but their combined effect is balanced out by the planet's rotation and ocean currents. The Earth spins fastest at the equator, and this centrifugal energy pushes water outward, spreading it thin. The result, small tides, smooth waters, a breath barely drawn. It's not an absence, it's a restraint. You begin to see the planet not just as a body of motion, but of variation, loud in some places, hushed in others. Like a song with long pauses between the notes, letting silence do its work. And still, even in these quiet regions, life follows the rhythm. Tiny changes in tide are enough for coral to time their spawning, for certain fish to know when to feed in shallow coves. The signal doesn't need to be loud, it only needs to be consistent. You dip your fingers into the warm sea. The surface ripples but gently. No crashing wave, no rising surge, just a soft reply. You wait a long time. The tide barely rises, barely falls. But if you stayed a full day, you'd see it. Maybe half a meter gained, then lost. A quiet pulse, a nearly still heart. In some of these areas, people don't even speak of the tides much. Boats aren't stranded, beaches don't change. The land and the sea remain almost constant companions. And yet, underneath that calm is the same force. The moon's pull, patient and steady. You understand now that stillness doesn't mean silence. It means subtlety. That a small tide can hold as much meaning as a large one. That presence is not measured by noise, and that sometimes the ocean teaches best by doing very little. We drift now to even more isolated waters, deep-sea trenches, far from land, where the tidal motion is almost invisible. There are no beaches here, no rocks to mark the rise and fall, but still the water shifts, even in the dark, even in the cold. Beneath the surface, thousands of meters down, the tide flows like a hidden river, not in height, but in current. Deep tidal streams that move vast amounts of water horizontally. They are unseen from above, but to the creatures who live there, they are everything. They bring nutrients, they carry warmth, they decide when and where life will gather. So you see, the tide doesn't always need to rise. Sometimes it simply moves forward. A quiet tide, a drifting tide, a breath not drawn in but out. Let yourself float now in this gentler rhythm. No roar, no rush, just the slow hush of a sea that holds its breath and still moves, faithfully with the moon. Your own breath slows to match it. A pause, a drift, a silence between heartbeats. The sleepy scientist within you understands now that not all truths announce themselves loudly. Some arrive as still water, a steady quiet, as a movement so subtle it can only be felt over time. In the next part of our journey, we'll begin to notice how these tides, loud or soft, strong or faint, serve as the planet's natural clock, setting the schedule not just for water, but for life itself. But not just yet. Let your breath rest in this moment of near stillness. Let the tide in you slow. Let the world quiet around you. The tide keeps time. Long before clocks ticked or calendars turned, the sea had its own rhythm. A breath drawn in, a breath released. Not once, but always. Not random, but exact. The tides do not guess. They remember. They repeat. They measure the passing of time in motion, not in minutes. You're drifting now along a quiet coastline, perhaps one wrapped in fog or softened by early morning light. There are no bells, no alarms, no counting, and yet everything moves in rhythm. The tide is rising. The water touches a line of shells left behind days ago. You notice, if you're still enough, that it's always the same. Roughly every 12 hours and 25 minutes, the sea returns, not by accident, not by luck, but because the moon moves and the earth turns and the ocean follows. It is a cycle older than memory, older than land. You sit beside the water now and feel its pulse. You could mark it with a stick, a stone, a knot in a rope. And indeed, people once did. Fishermen and sailors, farmers who planted salt-loving crops along tidal flats, monks in coastal abbeys who marked the tide like liturgy, all knew the sea is a clock, and when you learn to read it, it tells you everything. But this clock doesn't just keep time for humans, it keeps time for life itself. Follow us beneath the surface. Below the waves, plankton drift in darkness, rising and falling with the tide. They are not being carried by accident. They follow the rhythm, gathering near the surface when the tide rises, slipping downward as it falls. They feed, they bloom, they vanish again, all timed to the moon's call. Now further in, to tidal marshes and mudflats, where fiddler crabs emerge from their burrows exactly at low tide every day. They feed, they climb, they mate, and just before the water returns they vanish again, not 1 minute late. The tide is their schedule. Seabirds circle above. They do not guess where the fish will be. They know. They've learned the rhythm. A falling tide exposes new food. A rising tide hides it again. Their wings beat in time with the water's rise. Even coral, rooted, unmoving, has learned the clock. During certain tides, on certain lunar nights, corals around the world release their spawn in perfect unison. Thousands of colonies, across thousands of miles, blooming like underwater stars. Timed by the tide, timed by the moon. The sleepy scientist within you is quiet now, eyes wide, watching this immense choreography unfold. Nothing is random, nothing is out of place. You see the ocean differently now, not just as a body of water, but as a keeper of secrets, a timekeeper without hands or numbers, a moving archive of rhythm. There's a word for this coordination: entrainment. When organisms sync their internal cycles to external rhythms, many creatures entrain to the tides, others to the day-night cycle, some to both. Even humans, though we've drifted far from it, still carry traces of this synchronization. Have you ever stood near the shore and felt something shift inside you, just before the tide turned? Some quiet nudge, a sense of movement, even while still? That too is entrainment. Imagine now an old stone port town. The streets are damp with sea air. Tides rise through underground channels, filling cisterns and sweeping through canals. The city breathes with the sea. Fishermen know when to cast their nets. Children play on steps that will soon be underwater. Shopkeepers know not to leave goods on the lower stones. The tide is not news, it is known. In Venice, in Zanzibar, in ports across the world, human life once bent itself naturally to this clock, and even now we measure tides carefully, as if reading a very old and very accurate watch. Tide tables, nautical charts, tidal coefficients, forecasts whispered between sailors like weather spells. But beneath those numbers is the same truth. The tide is the pulse of the planet, a silent, moving timepiece that tells everything if you know how to listen. So listen now, breathe now, let your inhale rise like a high tide. Let your exhale fall, not rushed, not counted, just felt, trusted, repeated. The next part of our journey will take us to the muddy, whispering edges of estuaries and tidal flats, places where time and tide blend into ecosystems of quiet richness, where the moon gives not just motion, but nourishment. But not yet. Let this truth settle in you now. The ocean keeps time, and so can you. The tide feeds, not only with rhythm and time, but with life, stirring nutrients from the deep, drawing them toward the shore, then spreading them across wide, wet places where land and sea touch gently. These are the estuaries, the tidal flats, the salt marshes, quiet places, muddy places, breathing places. You're standing now in a tidal flat at low tide. The air is thick with salt and soft light. The ground is slick beneath your feet, patterned with shallow pools and tiny ridges left behind as the water retreated. All is still, but only on the surface. Beneath the mud, entire worlds are waking. A small burble of bubbles rises near your toes. Something has exhaled. A clam, perhaps, or a ghost shrimp. Buried just beneath the surface, these creatures live in time with the moon, waiting for the moment when the tide returns to cover them in safety and fresh nutrients. You kneel to watch. Everywhere the flat is alive. Worm trails curl in looping paths. Small crabs flick mud from their tunnels. The pools are full of flickering fish, their silver sides catching the soft light like drifting mirrors. This is where the tide gives back, where the moon, through its pulling and releasing, has created one of Earth's most fertile ecosystems. The movement of water doesn't just shape these places, it nourishes them. Each time the tide comes in, it carries dissolved nutrients from deeper waters. Phytoplankton bloom in response, feeding filter feeders. The filter feeders nourish fish. The fish feed birds. And all the while, the mud, dark, rich, living, breathes and absorbs and grows. This system isn't chaos, it is a ritual, a ceremony held twice daily, with each incoming tide acting as both messenger and feast. The sleepy scientist in you feels reverence here. You're not in a dramatic place. There are no towering cliffs, no crashing waves, but there is balance, precision, intelligence in the very patterns of the mud. Salt marsh grasses sway in shallow currents. Their roots stabilize the shoreline, their blades capture silt and detritus. As the tide retreats, they release oxygen into the water, breathing both ways, like the ocean itself. Somewhere nearby, a heron steps silently through the shallows, pausing, then striking. The fish it lifts from the pool has been brought here by the tide. Everything here is linked by that flow. The predator, the prey, the plant, the mud, the moon. You see now why life has evolved to meet the tide, not resist it. To follow its timing, to depend on its return. The tide is not a disruption, it is a provider, and so many creatures wait for it. Horseshoe crabs coming ashore to spawn during specific tides, their eggs feeding thousands of migrating birds. Juvenile salmon using estuarine shallows as nurseries, protected, rich in food, connected to both river and sea. Even the mud itself holds life. Bacteria process nutrients, create gas, and build the foundation of entire food webs. You scoop up a handful and feel it warm in your palm, living earth soaked with the sky's rhythm. And then the tide begins to turn. You hear it first, a soft trickle in the distance, then a shift in light as water creeps back over the flat. It is not sudden, it is not loud. It is like a forgotten thought returning to your mind. The pools begin to merge, the crab tunnels fill, the heron lifts its wings and glides away, just ahead of the rising edge. The tide returns, the same yet different, carrying new food, covering the old tracks, preparing to start the cycle again. You walk slowly back, following the rising line of water, and you feel grateful that the moon, so far away, brings life to the mud at your feet. This is the generosity of gravity. This is the kindness of rhythm. The sleepy scientist within you notes one final thing. These ecosystems are fragile, sensitive, disrupted easily by pollution, by development, by thoughtless change. But when left alone, when allowed to breathe with the tide, they flourish in silence. You breathe in again, a high tide breath. You breathe out. The tide recedes. In the next part of our journey, we will move away from wild places and into human ones, cities, ports, and tunnels where tides still flow, but beneath concrete and steel. Places where the moon pulls not just nature but machines. But not now. Now you remain with the mud, with the pools, with the unseen lives waiting beneath the silt. Let the returning tide pass softly over your ankles, your knees, your chest. And as you float, know this: the tide feeds, quietly, constantly, and always in time. The tide flows through cities, beneath piers, through culverts, under bridges and wharves. The same rhythm that shapes the wild coasts pulses through the veins of human places. And though we build walls and harbours, though we pour concrete and pave the edges, the moon still finds its way in. You're standing now at the edge of an old port city. Perhaps it's Boston, or Venice, or London, where the Thames bends gently between cathedrals and glass towers. The air is thick with salt and soot. Below the surface, something ancient moves, steady, strong, unseen. The tide. It rises between buildings. It presses against sea walls. It rushes into storm drains and overflows into hidden channels. You can't always see it from the street, but it's there. The slow, daily swelling and falling of the sea, woven into the city's breathing. Long ago, this rhythm was more visible. In older cities, docks were built to match the tide's cycle. Stone steps descend deep below bridges, designed to reach boats no matter the hour. Warehouses once timed their loading schedules to the waterline. At low tide, goods were carried across mudflats. At high tide, they floated directly into ships' holds. Even now in modern cities, tide charts hang in harbour masters' offices. Subway systems monitor tides during storms. Drainage pipes and pumping stations operate on a lunar rhythm, clearing or closing based on where the moon is in the sky. The sleepy scientist within you walks the narrow alleys near the water and hears the tide whispering behind manholes and floodgates. It flows beneath the surface, pushing gently into the bones of the city. This is not intrusion, it's memory. We built these cities by the water for a reason: to trade, to travel, to be near the source. And so, the water came with us. It didn't stay outside. It came into the design, into the bricks, into the bricks, into the planning. In some places, this relationship remains intimate. In the Netherlands, tidal energy is captured through gates and turbines. In Japan, entire city blocks rise on stilts, breathing with the tide. In New Orleans and Miami, Engineers dream of living architecture that moves with water, not against it. And in other places, the tide becomes warning. High tides now reach where they once did not. In many cities, king tides, those especially high spring tides amplified by weather and sea level, flood streets even on calm days. Salt water creeps into basements. Roots of trees begin to soften. Parking lots shimmer with brackish puddles. The tide arrives, not with rage, but with memory, reminding us it has always been here, patient and rising. Still, it carries no malice. The tide is not a flood, it is a breath, but it cannot be held back forever. It waits, it returns. You wander now into a tidal tunnel, a place where seawater flows beneath a railway line. The sound is soft, almost shy, a low gurgle as the tide begins to turn. Pipes shudder slightly, damp walls glisten with condensation. Somewhere above, trains continue their rhythm, unaware of the older rhythm moving below. This is the layering of systems, human and natural, both keeping time, both marking space. The moon does not notice the concrete. It pulls the water all the same. Even in great cities, the ocean breathes. In the silence of the night, delivery drivers cross bridges where the tide runs below. Barbacks rinse glasses as the harbour rises a few inches closer. Security guards watch the reflection of the moon ripple in parking lot puddles. No one speaks of it. But the tide continues. Always, it continues. You begin to wonder, what other places move quietly beneath the surface? What else flows with the lunar pulse? Aqueducts, foundations, basement wells. Everything built near water inherits its rhythm, and everything, in time, learns to listen. The sleepy scientist watches one more thing. In some cities like Tokyo or Seoul, there are deep underground chambers designed to hold back tidal surge. Enormous cisterns like temples beneath the street. Silent, cool, echoing with the sound of dripping water. Waiting, preparing. We have learned to live with the tide, not conquer it, not escape it, but to fold its breath into our own. And so, tonight, you walk back through city streets, watching the tide slide back through the storm drains. It has done its work. It has washed the docks, lifted the barges, brushed the foundations, and now it pulls away again, unseen, but not unnoticed. In the next part of our journey, we'll follow the moon itself, not just in its pull, but in its path. We'll see how it is moving away from Earth slowly, and what that means for the tides of tomorrow. But for now, stand still. Let the tide beneath your city carry your thoughts outward. Let your breath match its quiet rise and fall. Urban, ancient, invisible. The moon is leaving, not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, steadily, in a motion so small it takes centuries to notice. Each year, the moon drifts about 3.8 centimeters farther from Earth. A quiet goodbye, written in millimeters. You're floating now in the high stillness of space, watching the Earth and moon in their shared dance. The Earth spins, blue and dappled with cloud. The moon circles pale and pockmarked, but the circle is not perfect. The orbit widens bit by bit with each passing year. This drifting is the result of tides, not the tides in the water alone, but in the Earth itself. You see, Earth is not entirely rigid. It flexes, it bulges slightly beneath the moon's pull, not only in the oceans but in its very crust. And because the Earth spins faster than the moon orbits, these bulges are pulled slightly ahead of the moon's path. Imagine a gentle tug on a leash, not backward, but slightly sideways. That forward pull adds energy to the moon's orbit. A tiny push, again and again, over eons. As a result, the moon accelerates, not in speed, but in distance, and begins to slip away. The sleepy scientist in you watches this process with quiet awe. This is tidal acceleration, a transfer of energy invisible to us, but powerful over time. The tides raised by the moon slow Earth's rotation. That lost energy is passed on. The moon takes it and leaves. This has been happening since the beginning. Long ago, billions of years ago, the moon was much closer. The tides were towering then, far stronger than anything we see now. The Earth spun faster. A day lasted only 6 hours. The moon was larger in the sky, pulling oceans into great sweeping arcs across the surface. But even then, the same law held. The energy moved outward. The moon drifted, and over time the tide softened. It continues today, slowly. A day is now 24 hours, but still growing longer. Tiny amounts, just milliseconds each century. The moon, meanwhile, gains distance. Someday, far in the future, Earth's spin and the moon's orbit may become locked, each always showing the same face to the other, forever in balance, no longer shifting. But we will not see that day. Still, the knowledge of it is gentle, humbling, to know that the tides are not fixed but evolving, that even the rhythms we trust will one day slow. And what happens then, when the moon is farther away? The tides will weaken, the bulges will flatten, the breadth of the ocean will become shallower, not gone, but gentler. The great high tides will lessen, the strong flows will ease, the resonance in places like the Bay of Fundy may fade, the life cycles shaped by tides will shift too. New rhythms may form, ecosystems will adapt, as they always do, to the changing breath of the sea. You return now to Earth, standing once again at a familiar beach. The moon is rising above the water, and it looks the same as it always has, bright, steady, watching. But now, you know it is moving away. You know the tides it pulls will not always be what they are now, and yet you're not saddened. You're stilled. This slow drift reminds you that nothing in nature is truly still, not even what seems most permanent. The tide comes in, the tide goes out, and with each cycle something ancient shifts. You feel your own heartbeat slow to match this truth, that even the sky moves with time, that even the moon is not anchored forever, and yet, despite its drifting, the moon continues to pull, the tide continues to rise, the ocean continues to breathe, for now. And for long, long ages still to come. In the next part of our journey, we will step back further in time, to the ancient peoples who saw the tides and told stories long before there's a science, who saw in the moon's pull a kind of magic, a kind of mystery, and passed it down in myth, but not yet. Now, just watch the moon. Let it drift gently beyond your reach, but never beyond your understanding. Let your thoughts move outward with it. Let your breath follow that soft, eternal path. Long before equations there were stories. Before tides were measured, before gravity had name, people looked to the moon and saw meaning. They watched the sea rise and fall and felt that it breathed with something beyond them, something watching, something powerful, something divine. You're sitting now by a fire on a stone coast thousands of years ago. The sky is dark and full of stars. The tide is rising. A child asks why the water always comes back. An elder points to the moon, and a story begins. In ancient Polynesia, the moon was a great canoe that pulled the ocean behind it as it travelled. In Japan, it was believed that sea deities stirred the tides with giant ropes tied between land and sky. In Norse myth, the moon was hunted across the heavens by wolves, its passing stirring wind and wave. Everywhere, people noticed the rhythm. Fishermen planned by it. Farmers read its signs. Women marked their own cycles by the moon's changing face. Time was not something counted, but felt. In the water, in the light, in the stories passed from one fire to the next. The sleepy scientist within you sees how myth was not ignorance, but awareness. The stories may not have spoken in scientific terms, but they named the same patterns, the tides, the phases, the pull. In West Africa, the rise and fall of the tide was believed to be the breathing of a sea god, dreaming beneath the waves. In ancient China, tides were the size of a celestial dragon, coiled around the earth. In many indigenous traditions, the moon was a grandmother, wise and constant, who sang the ocean to sleep and woke it again each day. These stories do not conflict with science, they complement it. They remind us that before we understood the mechanics, we understood the wonder. You rise now and walk along a shore lit only by stars. A ritual is happening nearby, perhaps a moon festival or a ceremony to bless the water. You hear singing. You see shapes moving along the tide line, placing offerings into the sea. Flowers, shells, tiny boats made of leaves. The ocean receives them as it always has, rising, accepting, receding, tide as prayer, moon as answer. In time, stories became observations, observations became calendars. In 1100 BCE, Babylonian astronomers began recording lunar movements on clay tablets. In ancient Greece, philosophers like Pythias linked the moon to the tides. In India, in Rome, in Arabia, scholars refined the idea, added numbers, made predictions. But the moon was never just an object. It remained a companion, a teacher, and for many, a protector. You drift now through time, watching ships cross oceans guided by lunar tides. Watching temple builders align structures to the moonrise over water. Watching poets write verses to the sea's return, to the moon's silver trail over waves. Science does not erase story. It simply looks beneath it to see how it works. The moon still pulls, the tide still answers, and we still listen, not just with instruments, but with imagination. Because even now, with satellites and models, the sight of a full moon rising over a calm bay can stir something wordless inside us. We still feel small. We still feel connected. We still feel awe. The sleepy scientist within you smiles now, realizing that knowing how something works does not steal its beauty. If anything, it deepens it. To understand gravity and still feel enchanted. To measure the tide and still sense a whisper in it. To see the moon and still feel that it sees you too. In the next part of our journey, we'll travel to Earth's far edges, to places of ice and fire, where tides move through extremes, carving glaciers, feeding volcanoes, pushing the boundaries of life. But not just yet. Tonight, let the myths rise like the tide. Let them fill your mind with quiet, glowing shapes. Let your breath match the old stories, steady, sacred, unseen. At the edge of the world, the tide still moves. Through ice and beneath fire, in places where few have walked, the moon's pull reaches into silence. It touches glaciers. It stirs lava. It breathes through snow and steam, reminding even the most extreme landscapes that they too belong to the rhythm. You're standing now on a frozen coast. The wind is sharp but still. The sky is pale blue and the ice stretches outward in vast white sheets, broken only by deep channels of dark water. Somewhere beneath that surface, beneath the glaciers, beneath the polar sea, the tide moves, slowly, heavily. but it moves. The Arctic and Antarctic are not beyond the moon's reach. Here, the tide pushes and pulls massive amounts of ice-laden water, creating currents that swirl beneath the surface. These under-ice tides are hidden from view, but powerful, carving caverns in the bottoms of glaciers, lifting and dropping ice shelves, whispering to the foundations of frozen continents. Sometimes these movements cause the ice itself to crack, not with violence, but with sound. A deep, groaning echo rolls across the plain. The ice shifts. The glacier sighs. The moon has spoken, and the coldest part of the world has answered. The sleepy scientist within you listens, chilled and still, as if the earth itself has turned in its sleep. These icy tides do more than move water. They move heat. Under the surface, the tides carry slightly warmer ocean water into contact with the base of glaciers, a slow, persistent erosion that shapes how the ice melts, how the seas rise, how the planet breathes. The moon pulling the sea reshapes the land, even here. But not only here. Now follow us to the opposite, to a coast of fire and stone, perhaps in Iceland or the Aleutian Islands, where the land steams and smokes and cracks with pressure. The ocean meets lava here. The tide rolls over black rock still warm from the Earth's heart. The tide cools it. The tide carves it. The tide carries away what the volcano builds. There are places deep beneath the ocean's surface where tides mix with geothermal heat to create life. Hydrothermal vents, ringed with creatures found nowhere else. Tube worms, heat-loving bacteria, fields of alien shapes swaying in the darkness. You're drifting now through one of these deep-sea valleys. You cannot see the tide, but you can feel its presence in the sway of the water, the gentle push and pull of chemical-rich currents. Here, where there is no sunlight, the tide brings change. It stirs the nutrients, it disperses the heat, it allows life to bloom in the darkest corners. Back on the surface, along coastlines shaped by volcanoes and shifting plates, the tide interacts with the land that is always becoming. It scrubs new beaches, it reclaims land swallowed by eruption, it soothes what fire creates. The earth, beneath its crust, is restless. The tide, above, is patient. Together, they shape the extremes. Even in fjords, those long glacial valleys filled with seawater, the tides move like slow breath through stone lungs. In places like Norway, Alaska, Chile, the water travels miles inland, rising and falling between sheer walls of rock. The ocean, confined, becomes a silent guest in the mountains. You stand now at the edge of such a fjord. The air smells of salt and pine. The walls rise high around you. The water laps quietly at stones that have stood for ages. It feels like a cathedral, vast, cold, sacred. The tide arrives, lifts the world by a few feet, then departs just as quietly. Even here, the moon watches. The sleepy scientist in you begins to understand. There is no part of the earth untouched by this pull. No place too cold, no volcano too hot, no cavern too deep. The tide does not choose where to move. It moves everywhere, gently, repeatedly, eternally. It carries nutrients through ice. It cools lava. It cradles ecosystems no sunlight has ever reached. Let that truth settle around you now. The tide is not only for warm beaches and soft sands, it is for the entire earth, from the highest cliffs to the darkest trenches. The moon does not play favourites, it simply pulls, and the earth, in all its forms, responds. In the next part of our journey, we will leave Earth entirely and imagine tides on other worlds, moons orbiting gas giants, oceans hidden beneath alien ice, and the strange rhythms they might know, but not yet. For now, you remain here, among icebergs and steam vents, among groaning glaciers and glowing lava. Let your breath be slow, let your thoughts stretch across extremes, and let the tide within you feel just how far the moon can reach. Other worlds have tides too, not tides we could walk through or listen to on sandy shores, but tides all the same. Some of them are vast and invisible, some crack ice, some stir oceans buried beneath frozen shells. Across the cosmos, the moon's gentle pulling is not an exception. It is a rule, a quiet rhythm played on the instruments of gravity, mass, and time. You're floating now above Jupiter. Below you, its largest moon, Io, a place of fire, not water. Io has no oceans, but its tides are violent, not of the sea, but of stone. As it orbits the gas giant, Jupiter's immense gravity stretches and squeezes Io's interior. Over and over, this constant kneading heats the moon from within, creating molten rock, building pressure, and fueling volcanoes. Io is the most volcanically active body in our solar system. Tides made of lava. This is tidal heating, a force that stirs not just water, but worlds. Now you drift outward, to Europa, another moon of Jupiter, cold and smooth, with a crust of ice. But beneath that icy shell, we believe there is an ocean, a deep hidden sea, perhaps twice the volume of Earth's oceans, kept warm not by sunlight, but by tides. Jupiter's gravity pulls and releases Europa in slow, repeated cycles. The ice cracks, the ocean below stirs. Some believe these tidal movements create underwater currents, mixing heat and minerals, perhaps even allowing life to form. You close your eyes, and for a moment, imagine standing on Europa's frozen surface. The stars are sharp, the cold is complete, and beneath your feet, miles below, something may be moving. A tide, ancient and secret, stirred by a planet hundreds of millions of miles away. Now on to Enceladus, one of Saturn's moons. It too has an icy shell. It too hides a liquid sea beneath. And from cracks near its south pole, geysers erupt, jets of water and vapor shooting into space. The cause? Tides. Saturn's pull flexes the interior of Enceladus, heating it enough to melt water, which escapes through surface fractures like breath escaping from sleeping lips. Some of that water becomes part of Saturn's rings. Some falls back as snow. Some perhaps carries the chemical whispers of life, all because of tides. The sleepy scientist within you watches these alien tides with quiet wonder. They are not like Earth's. There are no waves, no beaches, no seashells left behind. But the principle is the same. Mass moves mass. Rhythm shapes motion. Gravity creates breath. Even on exoplanets, distant worlds orbiting distant stars, astronomers detect signs of tidal locking. Some of these planets always show the same face to their star, just like the moon does to Earth. One side in perpetual day, the other in eternal night. The result? Extreme winds, atmospheric tides, heat drawn and redistributed across the surface in cycles we're only beginning to imagine. We think of tides as soft, familiar, but they are cosmic forces, shaping the very structure of moons, of planets, of orbits and climates. Without them, many of these worlds would be cold, inert, unchanging. With them, there is movement, possibility. Even the Earth's own moon was once born of impact, a piece of the Earth flung into orbit. Since then, tidal forces have shaped its path, slowed its spin, locked it into the pattern we now know. The same face, the same pull, the same gentle breath, and always the same mystery. You're drifting now through darkness, stars around you like scattered salt. Below, moons and planets continue to turn. The tide, it seems, is not an earthly gift. It is a language spoken by gravity itself, a universal breath. You begin to wonder, are there creatures beneath Europa's ice who know the tide, who wait for its pulse to bring warmth or food, who live by its schedule, just as Earth's fiddler crabs and coral do? We do not know, but the rhythm is there, and wherever there is rhythm, there may be life. Let that thought rest with you now, that tides are not merely water moving on sand. They are time, they are heat, they are connection, across oceans, across orbits, across galaxies. In the final part of our journey, we will return home, to Earth, to moonlight, to the quiet rise and fall of the tide as it touches our shores once more. But not yet. For now, float among the stars. Let the alien tides pass through you, soft and slow. Let your breath match the rhythm of a moon you've never seen, yet somehow understand. The moon is above you again, familiar now, gentle, watching. After all our drifting, through science and story, ice and fire, alien oceans and ancient myths, we return to where we began. A quiet shore, a dark sky, the ocean breathing in and breathing out. The tide is coming in. You sit on a smooth rock near the water's edge. The waves reach slightly farther each time. The line between sea and land blurs slowly as it always does. But now you see more than just water. You see memory, motion, connection. The moon, high above, is no longer just a distant light. It is the silent conductor of this entire symphony. The reason the ocean moves, the reason time flows the way it does along the coast. You have followed that movement now across continents, beneath ice, into cities, through myths, and across moons. You have seen that the tide is not one thing, but many. It is physics and poetry. It is breath and blueprint. It is the moon pulling at Earth, and Earth pulling back, and all of us, in some quiet way, pulled too. The sleepy scientist within you feels no need to speak. You already know what this moment means. The tide doesn't ask for explanation. It simply is. It arrives. It leaves. It returns. There's something comforting in that. You think of the water's long journey to this moment, the tidal bulge sliding slowly across the globe, shaped by the moon's position, reshaped by Earth's rotation, curved by continents and seafloor. You think of how this same water has touched other shores, been lifted into clouds, fallen as rain, frozen, melted, flowed again. And yet, here it is, rising at your feet. You look up at the moon and know that this is not chance. This is rhythm. This is gravity written into the ocean's bones and into ours. We too are shaped by cycles. We sleep, we wake, we rise and fall. Our bodies follow lunar rhythms, subtle echoes of the tide deep within our cells. You let yourself feel that now. The tide is not outside you. It is within. A rhythm older than breath, a pattern older than thought. And yet, here you are, thinking, breathing, part of it. You listen as the water brushes the rock where you sit, then again and again. You close your eyes. The moon glows beyond your eyelids. The tide continues. You do not need to see it. You trust it now. Somewhere another tide is falling. Somewhere else it is rising. The world moves together, quietly, endlessly, and now your breath follows. In, outside, in, outside. The sleepy scientist rests, the tide continues, and the moon keeps watch. Now, let it all fall away. The questions, the currents, the orbits and bulges, the science and the myth. Let it dissolve like moonlight on water, gentle and complete. You're no longer walking a shoreline or drifting above a frozen moon. You're simply here, weightless, still, surrounded by the hush of ocean breath. The tide has done its work. It has pulled and shaped and cradled. It has whispered to you across time and distance. Now it rests, and so do you. Breathe in as the sea once more arrives at the shore. Breathe out as it drifts back toward the stars. Nothing more is needed. The rhythm continues without you and within you. Feel your muscles soften. Your thoughts blur like sea foam. Your chest rises and falls in rhythm with something greater than thought. The deep, slow memory of water following moonlight. There is no tide to catch, no detail to remember, only this gentle night, only this slow exhale, only the stillness at the center of the world's turning. Let your body become part of the pattern, an inlet filled and emptied, a quiet harbor touched by silver light. Let go. There is nothing more to explore. The moon is above, the ocean is below, and you are safe between them.